Hello everyone, welcome to the next installment of writing tutorials from the NUGSE. Today we are going to focus on original synthesis in research writing, specifically writing a lit review from multiple sources, and how to employ a concept-based organization. So let's get started. In our video today, we will present some original student writing to show you some problems that arise and then to give examples of how to solve those problems. The first one is a serious one we talk a lot about in academic writing. It is plagiarism, and the second one is how to improve your understanding and demonstrating your knowledge of the sources that you've read by using a concept-based organization. So here's the first one. Let's have a look at this student text. Gender is one of those factors which can be explored with regards to online learning academic performance, motivation, or learning strategies. The bulk of existing relevant literature body is split into two parts. Those who believe that gender is of great importance in online learning and potentially affects the outcomes, and those who haven't discovered any meaningful gender influence on online learning behavior. So what can we say about this first example? This is a first paragraph of a body section, so just after the introduction. And what we notice first is that the introduction of this paragraph shows us the main idea of that paragraph. It's a very clear topic sentence. It tells us that gender is what we are talking about, specifically in terms of online learning and academic performance. Next, we see a synthesis of multiple sources. This is where we've taken several sources. You see the references from Sullivan, Rovai, Price, Chung, Ori, Astleitner, and Yüksel-Türk. And all of those have been synthesized to make one claim or one organization structure about those pieces. The bulk of existing literature is split into two parts. We've shown a new organization of all these ideas. However, all of this synthesis is something that Yüksel-Türk mentioned with these sources in his text in 2007. So we're going to take a look at what's exactly going on with this example. So here's the original from Yüksel-Türk. If you go and find, because I'm curious to know where the ideas came from, you look at the text from Yüksel-Türk, and this is page 13. You notice I've highlighted in red. He has said it differently, right? But he has said, actually, numbers of studies showed that male and female students experience the online environment differently. And there's these same sources, Chung, Gunn, Price, Rovai. And then, on the other hand, several results suggested that gender effects are insignificant. So this point is made fairly clearly by Yüksel-Türk, and it is repeated by the student, but it doesn't really indicate that this research comes from Yüksel-Türk's perspective. So just to point out, the student, back at this student example, the student has used these references as their own, right? As if the student had found all these sources and made that that distinction between the two groups of authors. Yüksel-Türk down here is just buried as one of the references. It isn't clear who's. So this first example of a source not being credited exactly right is a red flag for any reader to wonder where are these ideas coming from and to look more closely at the next paragraphs. So here's the student's continuation in the next paragraph. And what they've done here is to give good detail in explaining one of the studies. So you remember Rovai is one of the sources that this student found in Yüksel-Türk's text, and they went and found the study, and they gave some more details. They gave an original interpretation of more of the findings of what that study actually said. This is a good example of taking a piece of literature, finding the references or sources that are used, and then going and reading those sources and adding something new. So there's nothing wrong here. This is actually good, detailed reporting and summarizing of another. Then we look at the next three paragraphs. And again, I'm still thinking in the back of my mind, where did this information come from? And I start seeing the same name, Sullivan, Chung and Price, and Ori, and all those sources that were mentioned in Yüksel-Türk. So there's group one, which is the group that agrees that gender differences are important. And then Chung and Price, which is an extension of that same group one, and then the examples from group two. So I want to go back and look at Yüksel-Türk to see how closely has this mirrored the other, because as you see here, the student is presenting this as new research, as an original interpretation of these sources. So in the original, we go on in the next two paragraphs after that first one. This is from Yüksel-Türk, and we see the Sullivan example, followed by the Price and Chung group, followed by group two. And so what we have here is the original organization, and the argument is not the students, it's actually Yüksel-Türk's, and the student is just summarizing, is just repeating it. That original one is in 2007, and now here we are 8 years later, just saying the same thing. So let's look at the problem here. There's actually two problems, and the first is typical plagiarism. Yes, the student is reproducing an author's work without giving proper credit. In this case, it is Yüksel-Türk who found these sources, made some analysis, and the student has taken that analysis and presented it without making it clear that it came from Yüksel-Türk. It isn't specified in the citations or in the text that this is Yüksel-Türk's work, or that this review is based on the work of one other author. The second one is just as important, and as a student, it's one of your main goals to develop and demonstrate that ability to find sources, to comprehend what they say, and then to synthesize them and produce a text that shows a new understanding or a new organization. And this student hasn't gone to that step. They're not actually taking the steps to show and demonstrate these skills. So let's look at some solutions. So in order to solve this first problem, we need to review correct use of paraphrases and quotations. In the student example, we said that the biggest problem here is that we don't see that it is Yüksel-Türk's work that is being emphasized here. So how can we emphasize this paraphrase to give it a clear attribution to Yüksel-Türk? And we can do that just by adding this author attribution as Yüksel-Türk points out, and then the point that Yüksel-Türk makes. Now, you'll notice here that there's a clear emphasis on the author and the date and the page number. Exactly, if you want to read more about this distinction, or if you want to see the exact examples, you'll notice that Sullivan, Rovai, Chung, they're all omitted here because that point of those specific authors is not so important. If we want to go find that, we can do that by looking at Yüksel-Türk. So that's the first part. The second one is that we had this whole 3-paragraph, most of this essay relies on the same structure that Yüksel-Türk presented, where group 1 from Sullivan, group 2 Chung and Price, group 3, yeah, so on and so forth. If we fix this in the same way we fixed the first one, we end up with this Yüksel-Türk goes on. We keep the emphasis on Yüksel-Türk, where we say that he shows how recent research in gender differences online tend to be connected to differences in self-discipline, family situations, and flexibility. That's a summary of all of Sullivan's writing, because Sullivan is the original source, but Yüksel-Türk is the one who's pointing out how it applies to this situation. Again, we can keep the focus on Yüksel-Türk and say that he points to 2 specific studies which show that women are performing better and they're more confident in online learning environment than males. Again, we're giving page numbers, so if you want to know where those 2 specific studies are, They're on page 13 in Yüksel work. And finally, Yüksel offers more examples of studies that show a contrasting view. Again, the details aren't so necessary because this has been done. We're not adding any new information. We're just summarizing what has happened in the past. Now, this solves problem number 1, the first one about plagiarism. There's no plagiarism here, but if you look closely, we haven't solved 1.2. We haven't added in this ability to comprehend and synthesize sourcing. All we've done here is to summarize what one author did. So let's take a look at the solution to the second problem. In this case, we want to find and discuss your own literature. I have here an example from a different student who's writing about blogging and online learning. The introduction starts with an overview and highlights the major trends. Let's look at the first 2 sentences. There is a large body of research examining the benefits and possible areas for improvement in incorporating blogging to teaching and learning. This is the overview. We're going to talk about research in this field. The second is the trend. Most researchers agree to the fact that blogging is a useful tool for the development of active learning, student-centered pedagogy, learner autonomy, interactive and collaborative student communities. This is supported by these examples of the text. The student then goes on to pick out a few specific examples to illustrate that point, right? We want to show that these researchers all agree that blogging is useful. So the student writes, moreover, writing in educational blogs and participation in discussions through commenting on other people's work raises the level of understanding to the subjects and topics that are being studied. With a specific citation, the student goes on to use another example, but in none of these sources do they have this overlap where they only found sources from one first source. In the previous example, we saw a student that got all their research from one place. This student has taken research from several sources and brought them together on their own, and that's a good thing. If you notice in this text, the student could do a little bit of a better job to connect the ideas and explain how these examples that they use, for example, Farmer and Bartley Bragg and Harwood, and then Mack, there's these 3 sources, but they aren't really connected other than the words moreover, in addition, and really we could organize it a little bit better. But at first glance, this is a nice mixture of a variety of research from different sources. Moving on to the second big topic is how can we use our organization of our ideas in a literature review to reflect this concept-based organization. Now, this tutorial from the North Carolina State University Library is an excellent resource. They do such a good job that I just want to refer you to that review. If you haven't watched it, I recommend that you go there. What I'll do next is just to highlight the main ideas of what this review points to. If you want to hear the full version, you can go to that link there. So how do we create a concept-based organization? The main goal overall is to take all this information that you've gotten and to reorganize it in a way that you understand it and present it to your reader in a way that's useful for them to understand it. We talk a lot about research being connected and in a conversation, and if you notice in different journal articles that you read, you'll notice they're talking about the same topics, and if you look over time, you'll see trends and conversations that people agree and disagree and develop new ideas and support an overall argument over time. Now, in one line of argumentation, you can develop this chain that connects yours. And if you recognize a chain of an argument, that's good, but it's only the first step. Because really in a lit review, you want to connect all these different chains to your study. And that's really an essential part of writing a lit review, is that your idea is what holds all these ideas together. Your research is the focus here. And so we want to keep emphasizing and showing the connections, how the current literature connects to your study. This next slide also illustrates that. If you look at the red and gray blocks here, they are the research, and you see the connections between the topics, the concepts that you're developing, the major themes that you are addressing, but really, without your ideas and how your study connects to those ideas, you really don't have a literature review. A common mistake that we see is that the literature review begins to look like a list of one source after the next, after the next, after the next. And so you might have a paragraph about one source, and then another paragraph about a separate one, and then finally a summary and conclusions. And it isn't this synthesis of different ideas, it's more like a list of what you read. To make this concept-based organization, what you really need to do is to identify your concepts. To start out with, well, maybe you need to define the major terms, and that's your first concept. And then looking at, in a generic essay, you might have the advantages and then the challenges. So say A is the definition. And any of the sources that you find that deal with the definition, you'll put under concept A. Concept B are the ideas that are connected to the advantages of whatever your topic is, and C is the challenges. Now, you'll notice that the green article here under B and C addresses both sides, but we will want to discuss them in separate categories so that your organization of your essay follows an argument of your ideas and not a list of the articles that you used. And finally, you connect those all with an introduction, your body paragraphs, and your conclusion to show how they all connect as one new piece of literature, and not just like in the chain in the first slide, not just a list of related articles, but rather we want to have an original synthesis where you present your ideas in a new way. So this brings us to the end of the tutorial. Just to review our two main problems we discussed. The first one we divided into two problems. The first one is about unclear references. When we aren't clear with where the information came from, we can accidentally commit plagiarism, and so we need to give credit where it is due by being extremely careful with our references to highlight exactly where our information came from. The second part of this problem has to do with original synthesis, about finding a variety of sources and then engaging in a dialogue with the research. Our job in critical analysis and literature review writing is to take multiple sources and to bring them together in a new way, presenting the information in an original way that emphasizes what you have found and where you have found those sources. The second problem has to do with this presentation of your ideas. It is important to develop a concept-based organization where you take your original research and you organize it in a helpful way to your reader so that they can understand all the wonderful ideas that you are explaining. We hope that you have enjoyed this tutorial, and we will see you again soon.